All right, welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a topic that's, well, let's face it, it's pretty crucial for anyone prepping for the UPSC exams.
Definitely.
We're talking about India's language policy.
Mhm.
It pops up all over the prelims and the mains, so we really need to get a good grasp on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to be looking at this through the lens of a really interesting article from the Indian Express, so you know it's going to be relevant for your exams.
Definitely.
We'll be focusing specifically on the three-language formula and how it's impacted education standards in India.
Sounds good.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, language policy sounds dry as a desert.
Right.
But stick with us, because this is way more than just, which languages we learn in school.
Much more.
It gets into some really fundamental stuff about India, like identity and opportunity, and what the future of education even looks like.
I think a good place to start might be by acknowledging just how complex and controversial language policy has been in India, really since the very beginning.
Since independent.
Oh, yeah. It's almost like we've gotten stuck thinking about language as just a way to deliver information, a medium of instruction.
Right.
But not as something that actually shapes how we think and learn, a cognitive tool.
Oh, that's interesting. It makes me think about those debates that happened way back when in the Constituent Assembly, when they were trying to decide, like, what should be India's national language?
Oh, right.
I mean, everyone always talks about Hindi, but it clearly wasn't just as simple as, like, declaring Hindi the national language.
Not at all. Hindi, with all of its regional varieties and dialects, it was actually really complicated.
So it wasn't just one Hindi.
Not even close. Choosing one variety as the standard could have alienated tons of people.
Alienated.
Yeah, it could have marginalized other variations and maybe even created new social divisions.
Oh, wow. So much more to it than I realized.
Definitely.
And then there's English. I always found it fascinating that English stuck around.
It's true. Many people thought it would fade away after independence, but it's so deeply embedded in our systems.
In our systems.
Well, think about it. Education, the economy, even just how we interact with the rest of the world.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
English is everywhere.
So do you think English kind of stayed because it was seen as more neutral in a way?
That's definitely part of it, yeah.
It's just fascinating how much history plays into all of these decisions about language.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned earlier how we've kind of gotten stuck thinking about language as just a way to pass on information. And that made me think, does that go all the way back to the colonial education system, maybe?
You're right on the money. The colonial system, it was all about rote learning and memorization, just drilling facts into students' heads.
I see, yeah.
And think about it from their perspective. If everyone's memorizing the same stuff in the same language, it's much easier to administer exams across a huge, diverse population.
Yeah, that's true. But it doesn't exactly foster deep understanding, does it?
Not really. And unfortunately, I think we're still dealing with the legacy of that system today.
It's like we inherited a system that prioritizes, like, standardization over really grasping the concepts.
Exactly.
And that brings us to, well, the elephant in the room, right? The three-language formula.
Oh, yeah.
So as most of you know, this policy basically says students have to learn three languages: their regional language, Hindi, and English.
Right, but there's that exception for Hindi-speaking states, remember?
Right. They're supposed to learn another modern Indian language, usually one from the South, instead of Hindi.
Exactly. And while the National Education Policy, or NEP, the one from 2020, it keeps this basic structure.
Yeah.
It does try to give states and students a little more flexibility in which languages they choose.
How so?
Well, the requirement now is that at least two of the languages have to be native to India.
Oh, okay. So that's a little bit of progress, maybe.
Maybe.
But in practice, has implementing the three-language formula actually been smooth sailing?
Not really. We see lots of Hindi-speaking states where that third language slot ends up being Sanskrit or even French instead of another modern Indian language.
Interesting.
And honestly, how many fancy private schools in the north are really emphasizing, say, Tamil or Punjabi?
Yeah, good point.
Then you add all the political baggage that comes with language, and, well, it's easy to see why progress has been slow.
It sounds like there's a real gap between what the policy wants to achieve and what's actually happening in schools.
Yeah, definitely.
And while we're talking about important players in all of this, I wanted to ask about CAB, the Central Advisory Board of Education.
Right.
What role does CABE play in language policy?
Honestly, They've been super important in navigating the whole thing, especially with our federal system where education is often a state subject.
Oh, right, right.
They've done a lot of work behind the scenes to try to make language education more consistent across the country.
I see.
But the fact that they've been inactive for the past few years is, well, it's a bit worrying.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that's part of the reason why implementing the three-language formula has been so bumpy.
It's possible, yeah.
And here's something I think is really important for all of us, especially as future policymakers. Even if we somehow got the three-language formula to work perfectly, there's still a bigger issue looming.
Oh, what's that?
The fact that the quality of language teaching across all languages seems to be declining.
You're absolutely right. We see all this emphasis on coaching for science and math, but language teaching gets left behind.
Right.
It's no wonder that English proficiency is pretty low, even though it's a required subject in a lot of government schools.
And it's not just English, right?
Nope. The quality of Hindi teaching is suffering too. It's like we're treating languages as these cultural artifacts instead of tools for thinking and learning.
Right. Like, learn this language because it's part of your heritage, but without giving students the skills to actually use it.
Exactly.
It reminds me of what happened in Andhra Pradesh when they switched to English medium education.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the teachers weren't actually that proficient in English themselves.
Wow.
And the result was that learning outcomes really suffered.
Ooh, that's rough.
And this decline in language standards seems to go hand in hand with the decline in reading habits, too.
You're right.
It makes me wonder if schools are even trying to get kids to enjoy reading anymore.
It's a valid concern.
I mean, what does that mean for the future of language skills in India?
It's a big question, and it's one we need to figure out, especially if we want to be effective policymakers someday.
For sure. And we can't really talk about language policy in India without bringing up Tamil Nadu, can we?
Oh, of course not. They've always opposed the three-language formula pretty strongly.
Why is that?
Well, it really reflects deeper anxieties about protecting their linguistic identity, you know?
Okay.
And there's also that perception that Hindi is being imposed on them.
I see.
It just goes to show how important it is for any national policy to be sensitive to these regional and linguistic differences.
That's really insightful. I bet that's something that would really impress the UPSC examiners, too, showing that you understand these nuances.
It definitely couldn't hurt.
So, to wrap things up for our listeners today, I think the big takeaway is that India's language policy needs a serious overhaul, right?
Broadway.
It's not just about these formulas and mandates. It's about making sure the quality of language teaching is top-notch across the board.
Absolutely.
We need to give students the tools to be fluent in their regional languages.
Yeah.
In Hindi, AD, in English.
Yeah.
And not just because it's required, but because it allows them to learn better, to think critically, and to really participate in the world around them.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And here's a final thought to chew on as you continue your UPSC prep.
Okay.
What would your top priorities be if you were the one tasked with revising India's language policy?
It's a question worth thinking about for sure.
Definitely. And hey, let us know what you come up with in the comments below.
We'd love to hear your ideas.
And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives on these important UPSC topics.
And a big thanks to the Indian Express for the article that inspired this conversation.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, keep studying hard, and we'll see you next time.